The Republican debate covered a number of domestic issues, but it's the discussion on immigration that has the country talking. GOP frontrunner Donald Trump stayed on message.
We're a country of laws. We either have a country or we don't have a country. We are a country of laws. They're going to have to go out, and they'll come back, but they're going to have to go out, and hopefully they get back. But we have no choice if we're going to run our country properly and if we're going to be a country.
Taking issue with Trump's hard line was Florida Governor Jeb Bush. He said it's impossible to deport people in the country illegally.
12 million illegal immigrants, to send them back, 500,000 a month, is just not possible. And it's not embracing American values. And it would tear communities apart. And it would send a signal that we're not the kind of country that I know America is.
However, Trump argued America has a legal process and it's fundamentally unfair to those already on the waiting list.
We have millions of people right now online trying to come into this country. Very, very unfair to the people that want to come into our country legally. They've gone through the process. They're online, they're waiting. Very, very unfair to them.
According to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service Agency, the waiting list for immediate family members to join their U.S. citizen relatives in some cases exceeds 20 years. For example, the USCIS is still processing applications it received in 1993 for the Philippines and 1995 for Mexico. So is unfairness a new American value, according to Governor Bush, or is it unfair to those who waited to enter the country lawfully, like Mr. Trump said? Meanwhile, GOP Senator Ted Cruz added,
I will say for those of us who believe people ought to come to this country legally and we should enforce the law, we're tired of being told it's anti-immigrant. It's offensive. We can embrace legal immigrations while believing in the rule of law. And I would note, try going illegally to another country. Try going to China or Japan. Try going to Mexico. See what they do. Every sovereign nation secures its borders.
The Paris terrorist attack reminds us just how deadly not securing our borders can be.
And San Diego 6's Kimberly Dvorak is here. You mentioned Paris, and of course overnight we learned that one of the suspects had entered the country or entered from Syria through Greece. He was issued an emergency passport, a Syrian passport. We still aren't unclear of his original nationality. Yeah. But so now securing our borders is becoming a big deal. How do you think things are going to change, not only in Europe but across the world when it comes to securing our borders after the Paris attack?
Okay, well let's first talk. Last week we discussed with a German colonel from the Air Force, and he was talking about some of the issues that he was worried about. This was one of those issues. And when we have a number of refugees coming through the border, it makes it very difficult for them to recognize who's whom. And in the case overnight, the French police did identify one of the terrorists as a refugee that came in on October 3rd through Greece and then made his way up to Paris. They're also saying now that they believe 2 others were among the refugees coming into the country. Now, when you look at it from that perspective, it's really difficult for terrorists to get their messages to say, here's the date certain, here's what we need to do. So what we're probably seeing is this was the last guy that came in and told the 3 cells in Paris, saying, look, now's the time, here's the date, it's a go. And then they let them go. So that's the problem with these refugees. Now, 99% of these refugees coming in obviously aren't terrorists, right. So it presents a problem, and like Colonel Schondorf said last week, that it's a cultural issue that we're going to be faced with.
But the process to seek asylum, they're not nearly vetted as well in Europe as they are in the United States.
Well, in the United States, we're not necessarily vetting them quite as well either. I mean, especially when we're going to, go through the process of DACA and some of these other programs. It's very difficult. A lot of people that don't live in this country, they have 2, 3, or 4 last names. Which name did they use? It's very difficult to use fingerprints to see who was whom. So it's not as easy to identify who's coming to the country. and that's why it's a fairly long process for those people who are in line, and we saw some of them more than 20 years.
And when it comes to ISIS and the possible attacks, you had said Carlsbad recently made the news.
Yeah, actually there was a CBS Evening News, Scott Pelley ran a report saying that ISIS had put out a city list in the United States that it would be targeting, and Carlsbad was on that list. And so that brings it home here to San Diego, and we're a big military town, and we've discussed these issues a number of times. It just reminds people that we need to be very vigilant. If you see something, say something. If it doesn't feel right, walk away from the situation, because you just don't know, what's going on. And it also reaffirms what everybody in Europe is talking about today. All the main leaders are talking about we are going to have to do something about our borders, and we're going to have to figure out who's in our countries and who we let in, because as we saw in Paris on Friday night, they went after soft targets where people had no weapons and they were not going to be shot at, and it just shows you that it can happen anywhere, anytime, any place. And it's a sad.
Expect to see some security changes not only in Europe but possibly in the United States as well. So Kimberly, thank you so much for joining us this morning and talking more about the attacks.